The next morning, Linda Carter arrived at the bank's human resources office downtown at exactly 9 o'clock. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing through the events of the previous day over and over again. She had rehearsed what she might say in her defense, but every argument sounded weak even to her own ears. How could she explain that she had genuinely believed she was protecting the bank when all the evidence showed she had simply refused to follow proper verification procedures? How could she justify tearing up a check without making a single phone call to confirm its legitimacy? The truth was that she could not justify it, and she knew it. The HR director, a stern woman named Helen Rodriguez, met Linda in a small conference room. Also present was a representative from the bank's legal department and a union representative who was there to ensure Linda's rights were protected during the hearing. Helen opened a folder on the table and reviewed the basic facts of the case. Marcus Williams had entered the Riverside branch to deposit a check for $10 million. Linda had questioned him, refused to verify the check with the issuing company, accused him of fraud, and destroyed the check. All of this was undisputed. Helen then asked Linda to explain her actions in her own words. Linda took a deep breath and began to speak. She said that when Marcus had walked into her office, she had been suspicious because the amount was very large, and he did not look like the typical wealthy clients she was used to serving. She had asked him questions, but his answers had not satisfied her concerns. She had felt in her gut that something was wrong with the situation, and she had acted on that instinct. She had believed she was protecting the bank from a fraud attempt. Helen listened without interrupting, and when Linda finished, she asked a series of pointed questions. Had Linda called Horizon Technologies to verify the check? No, she had not. Had she asked to see additional identification or documentation beyond the driver's license Marcus had provided? No, she had not. Had she consulted with any colleagues or supervisors before destroying the check? No, she had not. Had she followed the bank's written procedures for handling large deposits and suspected fraud? No, she had not. With each question, Linda felt her defense crumbling further. The legal representative then reviewed the bank's policies on customer service and anti-discrimination. He read aloud from the employee handbook about treating all customers with respect and dignity, regardless of race, age, gender, or appearance. He reviewed the specific procedures for verifying large checks, which included mandatory phone verification with the issuing institution. He pointed out that Linda had violated multiple written policies and had exposed the bank to potential legal liability. If Marcus Williams decided to sue for discrimination, the bank would have very little defense. Helen asked Linda directly if she believed her decision to destroy the check had been influenced by Marcus's race. Linda wanted to say no, wanted to deny that she was prejudiced, but she could not quite bring herself to do it. She said that she had not consciously thought about race in the moment, but looking back, she had to admit that her assumptions about what a wealthy person should look like had definitely played a role in her judgment. She said she was not a racist, that she had never intentionally discriminated against anyone, but she could see now that her unconscious biases had affected her professional decisions. Helen appreciated the honesty, but explained that intent was not the issue here. The impact of Linda's actions was what mattered. She had humiliated a valued client, destroyed bank property, violated multiple policies, and potentially exposed the bank to legal action. The bank had an obligation to its customers and its shareholders to ensure that all clients received fair and professional treatment. Linda's actions had failed to meet that standard. After conferring briefly with the legal representative, Helen announced that Linda's employment with First National Bank was terminated effective immediately. She would receive 2 weeks of severance pay, and her benefits would continue for 30 days to give her time to find new insurance. She was asked to sign several documents acknowledging the termination and agreeing not to discuss the circumstances with anyone outside of legal proceedings. Linda signed the papers with a shaking hand. She had known this was coming, but the finality of it still hit her hard. Helen stood and shook her hand formally, thanked her for her years of service, and escorted her to the elevator. The whole process took less than an hour. Linda rode the elevator down to the lobby in a daze. She walked out onto the street into the bright morning sunshine and realized she had no idea what to do next. For the first time in 15 years, she had no job to go to, no office to manage, no staff to supervise. Meanwhile, across town, Charles Bennett was in his office reviewing the full investigation report that Helen had prepared. The report detailed not just the incident with Marcus Williams, but Linda's entire employment history with the bank. There had been no previous formal complaints against her, but several informal comments from customers and staff about her sometimes judgmental attitude. One customer had mentioned feeling looked down upon because of his casual dress. A staff member had noted that Linda seemed to give better service to customers who appeared wealthy. These were small things that had not risen to the level of formal complaints, but together they painted a picture of someone whose biases had been affecting her work for some time. Charles forwarded the report to the executive team with a memo outlining the steps he wanted to take to prevent similar incidents in the future. First, mandatory training for all customer-facing employees on unconscious bias and cultural competency. Second, stricter enforcement of verification procedures for large transactions regardless of who the customer appeared to be. Third, a review of hiring and promotion practices to ensure the bank was building a diverse workforce at all levels. Fourth, the creation of a customer advocacy position that would investigate complaints and ensure all customers were treated fairly. The executive team approved all of Charles's recommendations. Within a week, the training programs were being developed. Charles reached out to Marcus Williams and asked if he would be willing to participate in creating the curriculum, and perhaps even speaking to bank employees about his experience. Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to create real change. Over the next several weeks, Marcus worked with the bank's training department to develop a program that was honest, challenging, and practical. The program did not just lecture employees about discrimination, but helped them recognize their own biases and gave them tools to overcome those biases in their daily work. 3 weeks after the incident at the Riverside branch, Marcus Williams stood in the large auditorium at First National Bank's downtown headquarters. The room was filled with employees from every level of the organization. There were tellers and branch managers, loan officers and investment advisors, security guards and executives. Charles Bennett had made attendance at this training session mandatory for all customer-facing staff in the region. And word had spread quickly through the bank about why this training was happening and who would be leading it. Marcus had spent considerable time preparing for this moment. He had worked with the bank's training department to develop a presentation that was both educational and personal. He wanted to share his experience, but he also wanted to help people understand the broader context of bias and discrimination in everyday interactions. He wanted to challenge people to think differently, without making them feel attacked or defensive. It was a difficult balance, but Marcus felt it was important to try. Charles Bennett opened the session with a brief introduction. He explained that the bank was committed to providing excellent service to all customers, and that this training was part of that commitment. He acknowledged that there had been a serious incident at one of the branches, and that the bank was taking steps to ensure it never happened again. Then he introduced Marcus, describing him as an aerospace engineer and valued client who had graciously agreed to help the bank improve its practices. Marcus walked to the front of the auditorium and looked out at the sea of faces. Some people looked curious, some looked uncomfortable, some looked genuinely eager to learn. He began by telling them a little about his background. He explained that he had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a schoolteacher. He had always been good at math and science and had won a scholarship to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. After graduating, he had worked for several aerospace companies before starting his own consulting business. Now he worked on classified projects for major defense contractors, designing propulsion systems for next-generation spacecraft. He told them all of this not to brag, but to establish his credentials. He wanted them to understand that he was not just successful, but exceptionally successful in a highly technical and demanding field. Then he asked them a question. If he had walked into this auditorium wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase, would they have assumed he was a successful professional? Most people nodded. He then asked if they would have made the same assumption if he had been wearing jeans and a hoodie. The nods were less certain now. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Marcus described what had happened at the Riverside branch. He explained how he had been treated with suspicion from the moment he walked in, how his explanations and offers to provide verification had been dismissed, how the branch manager had ultimately torn up his check without making a single call to confirm its legitimacy. He spoke calmly and without anger, But the impact of his words was clear. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked shocked, some looked ashamed, some were visibly upset. But Marcus did not want them to just feel bad about what had happened. He wanted them to understand why it had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. He explained the concept of unconscious bias, the automatic associations and assumptions that everyone carries in their minds. He talked about how these biases are shaped by the media we consume, the neighborhoods we grow up in, the experiences we have throughout our lives. He explained that having biases does not make someone a bad person, but acting on those biases without questioning them can have serious consequences. He shared other stories from his life. The time he was followed around a department store by security while shopping for a gift. The time he was stopped by police while jogging through his own neighborhood because someone thought he looked suspicious. The time he was asked to show ID to prove he belonged at a conference where he was actually the keynote speaker. Each story illustrated how bias shows up in everyday interactions and how exhausting it is to constantly have to prove you're right, to simply exist in spaces without suspicion. Marcus then shifted to practical advice. He talked about the importance of following procedures rather than relying on gut feelings. He explained that verification is not an insult to the customer, but a standard business practice that should be applied consistently to everyone. He encouraged employees to examine their own assumptions when they found themselves making snap judgments about someone. He suggested they ask themselves what evidence they had for their assumptions and whether they would make the same assumptions about someone who looked different. He also addressed the fear that some employees might have about making mistakes. He acknowledged that people worry about saying or doing the wrong thing, and that this fear can sometimes lead to awkward or overly cautious behavior. He told them that mistakes happen, and that the key is to be willing to learn from them. He said that if they treated every customer with genuine respect and followed the bank's procedures consistently, they would avoid most problems. And if they did make a mistake, they should acknowledge it, apologize sincerely, and do better next time. The training session lasted 2 hours and included time for questions and discussion. Many employees asked thoughtful questions about how to handle specific situations. Some shared their own experiences with bias, both as victims and as people who had caught themselves making unfair assumptions. The conversation was honest and sometimes uncomfortable, but Marcus felt that real learning was happening. By the end of the session, he could see that many people were thinking differently about their work and their interactions with customers. After the formal training ended, several employees approached Marcus to thank him personally and to apologize on behalf of the bank. Kelly, the teller from the Riverside branch, was among them. She thanked him for his patience and grace in handling the situation and told him she had learned a great deal from his presentation. Marcus thanked her for her kindness and told her he appreciated her willingness to learn. Charles Bennett waited until most people had left before approaching Marcus. He shook his hand firmly and told him that the training had been exactly what the bank needed. He said that Marcus had a gift for explaining complex ideas in ways that people could understand and apply to their own lives. He asked Marcus if he would be willing to continue working with the bank as a consultant on diversity and inclusion issues. Marcus thought about it for a moment and then agreed. He said he would be honored to help create lasting change in how the bank served all of its customers. 6 months after the incident at the Riverside branch, First National Bank had undergone significant changes. The mandatory bias training that Marcus had helped develop had been rolled out to all employees across the entire organization. The bank had hired a chief diversity officer, whose job was to ensure that policies and practices promoted equal treatment for all customers and provided opportunities for all employees regardless of their background. New verification procedures for large transactions were now strictly enforced, with random audits to ensure compliance. Customer service evaluations now included specific metrics related to respectful treatment and professional conduct. Marcus had become a regular presence at the bank, not as just a customer but as an advisor and consultant. He worked with Charles Bennett and the executive team to review hiring practices, promotion decisions, and customer service standards. He led additional training sessions at branches throughout the region. He participated in recruiting events at colleges and universities, helping the bank attract diverse talent. The work was time-consuming, but Marcus found it deeply satisfying. He felt like he was making a real difference, turning his negative experience into positive change. The Riverside branch had undergone its own transformation. A new branch manager, a man named Peter Clark, had been brought in to rebuild the culture and restore customer confidence. Peter was a veteran banker with a strong track record of inclusive leadership. He held weekly team meetings focused on customer service excellence and created an environment where employees felt comfortable raising concerns or asking questions. The branch had also hired several new employees, deliberately seeking candidates from diverse backgrounds. The change in atmosphere was noticeable to everyone who worked there or visited regularly. Kelly the teller had been promoted to assistant branch manager, a recognition of her professionalism and her positive attitude during a difficult transition period. She had taken the bias training to heart and had become an advocate for fair treatment of all customers. She often shared the story of what had happened with Marcus as a cautionary tale about the importance of checking assumptions and following procedures. Her colleagues respected her for her honesty and her commitment to doing better. Meanwhile, Linda Carter had struggled to find new employment. The circumstances of her termination from First National had become known in the local banking community, and most institutions were reluctant to take a chance on someone who had shown such poor judgment. She had eventually found work at a small credit union, but at a much lower salary and without any management responsibilities. The experience had been humbling and painful, but it had also forced her to confront her own biases in ways she had never done before. She started seeing a therapist to work through her feelings and began reading books about racism and discrimination. It was difficult work and she often felt defensive or ashamed, but she kept at it because she knew she needed to change. One afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Linda was working at the credit union when a young man came in to open an account. He was casually dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, and he looked nervous. Linda felt her old instincts rising, that immediate suspicion and judgment, but this time she caught herself. She took a deep breath and smiled warmly at the young man. She asked how she could help him, and listened carefully as he explained that he was starting a new job and needed to set up direct deposit. She congratulated him on his new job and walked him through the account opening process with patience and respect. When he left, he thanked her for being so kind and helpful. Linda felt a small sense of accomplishment. It was a tiny moment, but it represented real change in how she approached her work and the people she served. Marcus continued to balance his aerospace consulting work with his advocacy work at the bank. He found that both roles enriched the other. His technical work reminded him of what he had achieved through talent and hard work. His advocacy work reminded him of the barriers that still existed and the importance of fighting to remove them. He began to speak at other organizations beyond the bank, sharing his story and his insights about bias and discrimination in professional settings. He became known as a thoughtful and effective speaker who could challenge people to think differently without alienating them. Charles, Bennett and Marcus developed a genuine friendship that went beyond their professional relationship. They met regularly for lunch or coffee, talking about everything from aerospace technology to social justice to their favorite sports teams. Charles often told Marcus that the incident at the Riverside branch, as terrible as it had been in the moment, had ultimately made First National a better organization. The bank had confronted uncomfortable truths about itself and had taken real action to improve. Customer satisfaction scores had actually increased in the months following the implementation of the new training and policies. Employee morale had improved as well, as people felt they were working for an organization that truly valued fairness and respect. The story of what had happened eventually became part of the bank's culture and history. New employees were told about the incident during their orientation as an example of what not to do and why the bank's policies on respect and verification existed. Marcus's name became synonymous with the bank's commitment to equal treatment for all customers. Some employees jokingly referred to the bias training as Marcus training, and the name stuck. It was a small form of recognition, but one that Marcus appreciated because it meant his experience had been transformed into something positive and lasting. On the anniversary of the incident, Charles organized a small celebration at the downtown headquarters. It was not a celebration of what had happened, but rather a recognition of how far the bank had come in the years since. Marcus was the guest of honor, and he gave a short speech thanking everyone for their commitment to change and their willingness to do the hard work of examining their own biases. He emphasized that the work was never finished, that fighting discrimination and promoting equality required constant effort and vigilance. But he said he was proud of what First National had accomplished and grateful for the opportunity to be part of that journey. As Marcus left the building that evening, he thought about the young man he had been when he first walked into the Riverside branch with his $10 million check. He thought about his anger and frustration and exhaustion at having to prove himself yet again. He thought about how close he had come to simply walking away from First National entirely and taking his business elsewhere. And he thought about the decision he had made to stay and fight for change instead of just fighting against injustice. It had been the harder choice, but also the right one. The incident that could have been just another painful story of discrimination had become instead a story of transformation and growth. Linda Carter had lost her job but had been forced to confront truths about herself that she might otherwise have avoided for years. The bank had implemented real changes that would benefit thousands of customers and employees, and Marcus himself had discovered a new way to use his success and his voice to create positive change in the world. He got into his car and smiled to himself. The check that Linda had torn into pieces had been replaced long ago, and the money had been deposited without incident. But the real value of that experience was not measured in dollars. It was measured in changed minds, improved policies, and the possibility that the next person who walked into a bank would be treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. That possibility, Marcus thought as he drove home through the evening traffic, was worth more than any check could ever be. Charles Bennett was in his office on the 15th floor of the downtown headquarters building when his phone rang. He saw Marcus's name on the caller ID and smiled as he answered. Marcus did not call often, usually only when he needed something specific related to his accounts or had questions about investment opportunities. Charles leaned back in his leather chair and prepared for what he assumed would be a routine conversation. But the tone in Marcus's voice immediately told him that something was very wrong. Marcus spoke calmly, but Charles could hear the tension underneath his words. He explained that he was sitting in the Riverside branch of First National Bank, in the office of the branch manager Linda Carter. He said he had come in to deposit a check for $10 million from Horizon Technologies. Charles felt a small flutter of excitement at hearing that, knowing that such a large deposit would be excellent for the bank's quarterly numbers. But then Marcus continued speaking, and Charles's excitement turned to confusion, and then to horror. Marcus described how Linda had questioned him, how she had refused to believe the check was legitimate, how she had accused him of fraud, and how she had ultimately torn the check into pieces right in front of him. Charles sat forward in his chair, his hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could not believe what he was hearing. Linda Carter had destroyed a $10 million check from one of the bank's most valued clients. She had accused Marcus Williams, a man with over $50 million in various accounts with First National, of being a fraud. Charles felt his face growing hot with anger. He asked Marcus to repeat the story, hoping he had misunderstood something, but Marcus patiently went through it again. Every detail made Charles feel worse. He knew Marcus personally. He knew Marcus's reputation in the aerospace industry. He knew that Horizon Technologies regularly paid Marcus enormous sums for his consulting work. There was no question about the legitimacy of the check or the legitimacy of Marcus himself. What Linda had done was not just a mistake, it was a catastrophic failure of judgment that could cost the bank dearly. Charles told Marcus he was deeply sorry and asked him to please stay at the branch. He said he was going to handle this immediately and personally. Marcus agreed to wait, and Charles ended the call. For a moment, Charles just sat at his desk, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. Then he picked up his phone again and dialed the direct line to the Riverside branch. His assistant tried to interrupt him with a question about his next meeting, but he waved her away. This could not wait. The phone rang several times before Linda Carter answered. Charles could hear the irritation in her voice as she gave her name and title. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He identified himself as the regional director and told her that he understood she had Marcus Williams in her office. Linda's voice changed slightly, becoming more professional, but she did not sound worried yet. She confirmed that yes, she had just dealt with a fraud attempt and had successfully prevented it from going any further. She sounded proud of herself. Charles felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice cold and controlled. He told Linda to stop talking and listen very carefully to what he was about to tell her. He could hear her take a breath, probably preparing to argue or explain, but he did not give her the chance. He told her that Marcus Williams was not a fraud. Marcus Williams was one of the most important clients the bank had. Marcus Williams kept over $50 million in accounts with First National. The check she had just destroyed was completely legitimate, issued by Horizon Technologies for consulting work on classified aerospace projects. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Charles could imagine Linda's face as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. He continued speaking, his voice growing harder with each word. He told her that she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She had destroyed a legitimate check. She had insulted and accused a valued client. She had potentially caused serious legal and financial problems for the bank. And worst of all, she had done all of this based apparently on nothing more than her own biases and assumptions. Charles told Linda that she needed to apologize to Marcus immediately. She needed to begin the process of getting a replacement check issued from Horizon Technologies as quickly as possible, and she needed to understand that her employment with First National Bank was now in serious jeopardy. He told her that he was placing her on immediate suspension, pending a full investigation into the incident. He was sending Gregory Shaw, one of the bank's vice presidents, to the branch right now to take over the situation and ensure that Marcus was treated with the respect and courtesy he deserved. Linda tried to speak, her voice shaking now, but Charles cut her off. He told her that she would have a chance to explain herself during the investigation, but right now her only job was to do exactly what he had told her to do. Apologize to Marcus, cooperate with Gregory, leave her access badge and keys on her desk, and go to the conference room to wait for further instructions from Human Resources. He did not wait for her response before ending the call. Charles immediately called Gregory Shaw and explained the situation. Gregory was shocked and angry, responding exactly as Charles had expected. Gregory said he would leave for the Riverside branch immediately and would personally ensure that Marcus was taken care of. Charles thanked him and then made one more call, this time to the head of Human Resources. He explained what had happened and instructed HR to begin a formal investigation into Linda Carter's conduct. He wanted a full review of her hiring, her training, her performance evaluations, and any previous complaints or incidents. He wanted to know if this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. After making all the necessary calls, Charles sat back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He had a headache forming behind his eyes, and he knew it was going to be a long afternoon. He thought about Marcus sitting in that branch office, humiliated and disrespected despite his accomplishments and his wealth. He thought about how many times Marcus must have experienced similar treatment throughout his life. He thought about the fact that Marcus had chosen to bring his considerable business to First National and how close they had just come to losing all of it because of one person's prejudice. Charles picked up his phone one more time and called Marcus directly. Marcus answered on the first ring. Charles apologized again, more personally this time, and assured Marcus that the situation was being handled at the highest levels. He told Marcus that Gregory Shaw would be there shortly and would take care of everything Marcus needed. He promised that First National would make this right, not just with words, but with actions. Marcus thanked him quietly, and Charles could hear the exhaustion in his voice. The exhaustion of having to deal with this kind of situation yet again. Marcus Williams pushed open the heavy glass door of First National Bank and stepped into the cool air conditioning. The afternoon sun had been beating down hard on the parking lot, and the sudden change in temperature made him take a deep breath. He looked around the lobby with its shiny marble floors and tall windows that let in streams of golden light. The bank was quiet today, with only a few customers waiting in line at the teller windows. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack on his shoulder and walked toward the counter. He was wearing his usual clothes, nothing fancy, just a pair of comfortable jeans and a gray hoodie that he had owned for years. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor as he approached. The young woman behind the counter looked up with a smile. Her name tag read Kelly, and she seemed friendly enough. Marcus smiled back and waited for her to finish with the customer in front of him. When it was his turn, he stepped forward and placed his hands on the counter. Kelly greeted him warmly and asked how she could help him today. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out an envelope. He explained that he needed to deposit a rather large check and wondered if he should speak with someone in management. Kelly's eyes widened slightly when he mentioned the amount, but she kept her professional composure. She nodded and told him that yes, for something like that, he would definitely need to see the branch manager. She pointed toward a hallway at the back of the lobby and told him to look for the office with the nameplate that said Linda Carter. Marcus thanked her and made his way across the lobby. He could feel a few eyes on him as he walked. Nothing unusual for him, really. Just the normal attention that came with being a young black man in spaces like this. He had grown used to it over the years, though it never stopped being uncomfortable. He found the office easily enough. The door was open, and he could see a woman sitting behind a large wooden desk typing something on her computer. Marcus knocked gently on the door frame and waited. The woman looked up briefly, her eyes scanning him from head to toe in a way that made Marcus tense slightly. She gestured for him to come in without much warmth in her expression. Linda Carter was a woman who took pride in her appearance and her position. She wore a perfectly pressed navy blue suit, and her hair was styled in a way that probably took an hour every morning. She had been the branch manager for 5 years, and before that had worked her way up through various positions in the banking industry. She considered herself an expert at reading people and situations. As Marcus entered her office and sat down in the chair across from her desk, Linda barely looked away from her computer screen. She finished typing whatever she was working on, and then finally turned her full attention to him. Marcus introduced himself politely and explained that he had a check to deposit. He reached into the envelope and pulled out the check, placing it carefully on the desk in front of Linda. The check was from Horizon Technologies, a major aerospace and defense contractor that worked on classified government projects. The amount written on it was $10 million. Marcus had been working as a consultant for them for the past 2 years, designing propulsion systems for next-generation spacecraft. This check represented his payment for the latest contract he had completed. It was legitimate, properly signed, and drawn on a major corporate account. Linda picked up the check and her eyebrows rose as she saw the amount. But instead of the usual excitement or congratulations that might come with such a transaction, her face hardened. She held the check up to the light as if examining it for signs of forgery. Marcus watched her carefully, sensing that this was not going to be as simple as he had hoped. He had been through similar situations before, though never with such a large amount. He knew what was coming, and he felt his stomach tighten with frustration. Linda set the check down on her desk and looked at Marcus with an expression that was a mixture of suspicion and condescension. She asked him several questions in rapid succession. Where did he get this check? What kind of work did he do? How long had he been working for Horizon Technologies? Did he have any identification? Marcus answered each question calmly and honestly. He pulled out his driver's license and a business card that identified him as a senior aerospace engineer. He explained his work in simple terms, avoiding the technical jargon that most people would not understand. He remained patient even as Linda's questions became more pointed and accusatory in tone. But Linda was not interested in his answers. In her mind, she had already decided what was happening here. A young man who looked like he had just rolled out of bed walks into her bank with a $10 million check. It did not add up. It did not fit the pattern of what she expected wealthy clients to look like. In her 15 years of banking experience, she had seen fraud attempts before, and this, she convinced herself, was obviously one of them. She had been trained to trust her instincts, and right now every instinct was telling her that something was wrong with this picture. Marcus could see the decision forming in her eyes even before she spoke. He had seen that look before, that moment when someone decided that he could not possibly be who he claimed to be, that his success could not possibly be real, that there must be some mistake or some crime involved. It was a look he had encountered in stores, in restaurants, in office buildings, and now here in this bank. He felt the familiar wave of exhaustion that came with having to prove himself over and over again. But he kept his expression neutral and waited to see what Linda would do next. Linda leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She told Marcus in a voice that dripped with false politeness that she had concerns about the check. She said that in her professional opinion there were several red flags that suggested this might not be a legitimate transaction. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. He asked her what specific concerns she had, and offered to provide any additional documentation she might need. He could call Horizon Technologies right now if she wanted. He could provide references, contracts, anything that would verify his identity and the legitimacy of the check. But Linda was not interested in verification. She had made up her mind. Linda Carter stood up from her chair and picked up the check again. She held it between two fingers as if it were something dirty that she did not want to touch more than necessary. Marcus watched her carefully, his patience wearing thin but his outward appearance still calm. He had learned long ago that showing anger in situations like this only made things worse. He needed to stay in control of himself even as the situation was spinning out of his control. Linda walked around her desk and stood in front of him, the check still dangling from her fingers. She looked down at him with an expression that made it clear she thought she had the upper hand here. She began to speak in a tone that was both condescending and accusatory. She told Marcus that she had been working in banking for 15 years, and in that time she had seen every kind of scam and fraud attempt imaginable. She said she could spot a fake check from a mile away, and this one, she was certain, was not real. Marcus tried to interrupt her, tried to explain again that the check was completely legitimate, but Linda talked over him. She said that she did not know where he had gotten this check or who had put him up to this, but the game was over now. She was not going to let him commit fraud at her bank. Marcus felt his heart rate increasing, but he forced his voice to remain steady. He told her that she was making a serious mistake. The check was real and it came from a legitimate company that she could easily verify with a single phone call. He offered again to provide documentation, to give her the direct number for the accounting department at Horizon Technologies, to do whatever was necessary to prove that this was not fraud. But Linda was not listening. She had convinced herself that she was protecting the bank from a criminal, and nothing Marcus said was going to change her mind. The tension in the office was growing, and Marcus could see that this was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. Linda's voice was getting louder, and her face was flushed with what seemed to be a mixture of anger and self-righteousness. She told Marcus that she was not going to waste her time or the bank's time verifying what was obviously a fraudulent document. She said that people like him came into banks all the time thinking they could get away with schemes like this, but she was too smart for that. The words "people like him" hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt the sting of what she was really saying. Marcus took a deep breath and tried one more time to reason with her. He spoke slowly and clearly, explaining that he was a consultant who worked on aerospace projects, that Horizon Technologies was one of the largest defense contractors in the country, that this check represented legitimate payment for legitimate work. He told her that if she destroyed or refused to process this check, she would be causing serious problems not just for him, but for the bank as well. He suggested that perhaps they could call her supervisor or someone higher up in the bank who might be able to help resolve this situation. But his words only seemed to make Linda more determined. She told him that she was the branch manager, and she did not need anyone's permission to do her job. Her job, she said, was to protect the bank from fraud, and that was exactly what she was going to do. Marcus felt a cold knot forming in his stomach as he realized what was about to happen. He started to stand up from his chair, started to reach for his phone, but Linda was faster. Before he could stop her, before he could say another word, she took the check in both hands and began to tear it. The sound of the paper ripping was loud in the quiet office. Marcus watched in disbelief as Linda tore the check once, then twice, then again and again, until it was nothing but small pieces of confetti in her hands. She let the pieces fall onto her desk where they scattered across the dark wood surface like snow. $10 million reduced to garbage in a matter of seconds. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. He had expected resistance, expected questions, expected delays, but he had not expected this. Linda brushed her hands together as if wiping away dirt and returned to her seat behind the desk. She looked at Marcus with an expression of satisfaction, clearly pleased with herself for what she believed was a job well done. She told him that now the matter was settled and he could leave. If he had any complaints, he could take them up with the police, who she would be happy to call if he did not leave immediately. She reached for her desk phone as if to emphasize her point. Marcus finally found his voice. He told her that she had just destroyed a legitimate check worth $10 million and that there would be serious consequences for what she had done. Linda laughed, a sharp and dismissive sound that made Marcus's hands clench into fists at his sides. She said that the only person who was going to face consequences was him if he did not leave her office right now. She said she was giving him a chance to walk away before she involved law enforcement. She said that he should be grateful she was being so generous. But Marcus was done being grateful and done being patient. He pulled out his cell phone and told Linda that he was going to make some calls of his own. He was going to call Horizon Technologies and inform them that their check had been destroyed. He was going to call his lawyer and explore legal options. And he was going to call the corporate office of First National Bank and report what had just happened. Linda's expression shifted slightly at the mention of the corporate office, but she quickly recovered her composure. She told him he could call whoever he wanted, but it would not change anything. She had done her job and she stood by her decision. Marcus scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. It was a direct line to Charles Bennett, the regional director of First National Bank. Marcus had met Charles years ago when they were both students at MIT. They had kept in touch over the years, and when Marcus had started making serious money from his aerospace work, Charles had helped him set up his accounts with First National. Charles knew exactly who Marcus was and exactly how much money he kept with the bank. Marcus pressed the call button and waited for Charles to answer. The phone rang 3 times before Charles picked up. His voice was warm and friendly as he greeted Marcus by name. Linda Carter slowly placed the phone back in its cradle. Her hand was shaking so badly that she almost dropped it. She stared at the scattered pieces of the torn check on her desk, the pieces that moments ago had seemed like evidence of her vigilance and good judgment, but now looked like the remains of her career. Her mind was racing, trying to process what Charles Bennett had just told her. Marcus Williams was a legitimate client. The check was real. She had destroyed $10 million. She had insulted someone who kept $50 million with the bank. She had let her assumptions and prejudices override every procedure and protocol she was supposed to follow. She looked across the desk at Marcus, who sat watching her with an expression that was hard to read. There was no anger on his face, no satisfaction at seeing her distress, just a kind of tired resignation that somehow made Linda feel even worse. She opened her mouth to speak but found that her throat had gone dry. She swallowed hard and tried again. The apology that came out was weak and stumbling, nothing like the confident, authoritative voice she usually used. She told Marcus she was sorry, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she should have verified the check before making any decisions. But even as she spoke the words, Linda knew they were inadequate. Sorry did not undo what she had done. Sorry did not erase the humiliation she had caused. Sorry did not change the fact that she had looked at Marcus and seen only his casual clothes and his skin color, and decided that he could not possibly be legitimate. She had violated every principle of good customer service and professional banking. She had let her biases make decisions that should have been based on facts and verification. Marcus listened to her apology in silence. When she finished, he simply nodded. He did not accept the apology with graciousness, and he did not reject it with anger. He just acknowledged it and continued to sit there waiting. The silence in the office was oppressive, and Linda found herself wishing that Marcus would yell at her, or storm out, or do something other than just sit there with that calm, patient expression. But Marcus had been through situations like this before, and he knew that his best protection was to remain calm and let the system work. Within 20 minutes, Gregory Shaw arrived at the branch. Linda heard the commotion in the lobby as he entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Gregory was a tall man with silver hair and a presence that spoke of authority and competence. He had been with First National for over 30 years and had worked his way up from a teller position to vice president. He was known for his professionalism and his absolute intolerance for discrimination or unprofessional conduct. He went straight to Linda's office, knocked once on the doorframe, and entered without waiting for permission. Gregory's face was set in hard lines as he looked first at Linda and then at Marcus. He crossed the office in 3 long strides and extended his hand to Marcus. His greeting was formal but genuinely warm. He addressed Marcus as Sir and apologized on behalf of the entire institution for the unacceptable treatment he had received. Marcus stood and shook his hand, and Linda watched as Gregory gave Marcus his full attention and respect. It was a deliberate demonstration of how Marcus should have been treated from the moment he walked into the bank. Only, after greeting Marcus, did Gregory turn his attention to Linda. His voice was cold and professional, as he told her to gather her personal belongings from her desk, leave her access badge and keys, and proceed to the conference room where she would wait for human resources to contact her. Linda felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She was not going to cry here in front of them. She opened her desk drawer with trembling hands and began removing her personal items, a framed photo of her daughter, a coffee mug that said "World's Best Manager," a small plant that had been a gift from the staff on her birthday. She placed them in her briefcase mechanically, her mind still struggling to accept what was happening. Gregory watched her for a moment and then turned back to Marcus. He told Marcus that he would personally escort him to the private client suite, where they could discuss his banking needs in comfort and privacy. He said that he had already been in contact with Horizon Technologies, and they were preparing a replacement check that would be delivered by courier the following morning. In the meantime, if Marcus needed access to any funds, Gregory would personally authorize whatever was necessary. Marcus thanked him quietly and picked up his backpack. As Marcus and Gregory left her office, Linda stood alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her career. She could hear them talking as they walked down the hallway. Gregory's voice apologetic and accommodating, Marcus's voice measured and controlled. She looked down at the scattered pieces of the check one more time, and then swept them into her trash can. She picked up her briefcase and her purse, removed her access badge from around her neck and her office keys from her keyring, and placed them on her desk as instructed. Then she walked out of her office for what she suspected might be the last time. The walk across the lobby to the conference room felt endless. Every eye in the bank seemed to be on her. Kelly the teller watched her pass with wide eyes. Other staff members whispered to each other as she went by. Linda kept her head up and her face as neutral as she could manage, but inside she was falling apart. She reached the conference room and went inside, closing the door behind her. The room was empty and silent. She sat down at the long table and finally let herself acknowledge the full weight of what she had done. She thought about her daughter in college, counting on her for tuition payments. She thought about her mortgage and her car payment and all the bills that depended on her salary. She thought about having to tell her family and friends that she had been fired for discrimination. But more than the practical consequences, she thought about the moment when she had looked at Marcus Williams and made a snap judgment based on nothing but appearance. She had prided herself on her experience and her ability to read people and situations, but what she had really been doing was letting prejudice masquerade as professional judgment. Her phone buzzed with an email from Human Resources, scheduling a formal hearing for the next morning. Linda read it and felt sick to her stomach. She knew what the outcome would be. There was no way to defend what she had done. She had violated bank policy, destroyed bank property, insulted a valued client, and potentially exposed the bank to legal liability. Any one of those things would be serious. All of them together were grounds for immediate termination. She set her phone down on the table and put her head in her hands. Gregory Shaw led Marcus through the main lobby of the bank and down a side corridor that most customers never saw. They walked past offices and storage rooms until they reached a door marked Private Client Services. Gregory used his keycard to unlock it and held the door open for Marcus. Inside was a suite of rooms designed specifically for the bank's wealthiest clients. There were comfortable leather chairs, beautiful artwork on the walls, a small kitchen area with coffee and refreshments, and several private offices where sensitive financial matters could be discussed away from the public areas of the bank. Gregory gestured for Marcus to take a seat in one of the leather chairs and asked if he would like coffee or water or anything else. Marcus asked for water and Gregory brought him a cold bottle from the small refrigerator. He pulled up a chair across from Marcus and sat down, his expression serious. He began by apologizing again, more thoroughly this time. He said that what had happened was completely unacceptable and did not represent the values or standards of First National Bank. He said that the bank took full responsibility for Linda Carter's actions and would do everything possible to make the situation right. Marcus took a sip of water and nodded. He appreciated the apology, but he was also exhausted from the entire ordeal. Gregory seemed to sense this and moved on to practical matters. He explained that he had already spoken with the accounting department at Horizon Technologies. They were issuing a replacement check immediately, and it would be delivered by secure courier the next morning before noon. Marcus would receive a call when the courier was on the way, so he could choose where he wanted the delivery made. Gregory also offered to have the check deposited into Marcus's account as soon as it arrived. With the funds available immediately, rather than waiting for the standard clearing period, Marcus agreed to that arrangement. Gregory then pulled out a tablet and began reviewing Marcus's accounts with the bank. He noted that Marcus had several checking accounts, savings accounts, investment accounts, and retirement accounts, spread across different divisions of First National. He suggested that it might be beneficial to consolidate some of these accounts and assign Marcus a dedicated private banker who would be available to him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This banker would handle all of Marcus's needs personally and ensure that he never had to deal with situations like the one he had experienced today. Marcus considered the offer. Part of him wanted to close all his accounts and take his business elsewhere. He was tired of having to prove himself, tired of being judged, tired of dealing with people who could not see past their own prejudices. But another part of him recognized that what had happened today was an opportunity for real change. Gregory seemed genuine in his concern and his desire to fix not just this incident, but the underlying problems that had caused it. Marcus decided to give the bank a chance to make things right. He told Gregory that he would agree to continue his relationship with First National on 2 conditions. First, he wanted assurance that Linda Carter's dismissal would not be the end of the matter. He wanted the bank to conduct a thorough review of its training programs and policies to ensure that other employees understood how to treat all customers with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance. Second, he wanted to be involved in that review process. He wanted to help the bank understand why what happened today was wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. Gregory was quiet for a moment, considering Marcus's conditions. Then he nodded slowly. He said that those were not just reasonable requests, but important ones. He told Marcus that Charles Bennett had already ordered a full review of the Riverside branch and its operations. Human Resources was investigating Linda's hiring and training to determine if there had been warning signs or previous incidents that should have been addressed. The bank was also planning to implement mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all employees. Gregory said he would speak with Charles about having Marcus participate in developing and delivering that training. Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. This was what he had wanted, not revenge or compensation, but actual meaningful change. He told Gregory that he appreciated the bank taking this seriously and that he was willing to work with them to make improvements. Gregory smiled for the first time since entering the branch and extended his hand again. They shook on the agreement, and Gregory made notes on his tablet about their conversation. Over the next hour, Gregory handled all of Marcus's immediate banking needs. He set up the new consolidated account structure, introduced Marcus via video call to his new dedicated private banker, a professional woman named Patricia, who had over 20 years of experience in wealth management. Patricia was warm and knowledgeable and made Marcus feel like his business was truly valued. They discussed investment strategies, tax implications, and long-term financial planning. By the time the call ended, Marcus felt like he was finally being treated the way he should have been treated from the beginning. Gregory walked Marcus out of the private suite and through the lobby. Every employee they passed greeted Marcus respectfully, though Marcus noticed their curious glances. Word had clearly spread through the branch about what had happened. Kelly the teller actually stepped away from her window to apologize to Marcus personally. She said she had sensed something was wrong when he was in Linda's office, but had not known how to intervene. Marcus told her it was not her fault and thanked her for her kindness. Kelly looked relieved and returned to her window. At the front door of the bank, Gregory shook Marcus's hand one final time. He gave Marcus his direct cell phone number and told him to call day or night if he needed anything at all. He promised that the courier would arrive the next morning with the replacement check, and that the funds would be in Marcus's account by early afternoon. Marcus thanked him and walked out into the late afternoon sunshine. The parking lot was still hot and the sun was still bright, but somehow the world felt a little different than it had when he had walked in a few hours earlier. Marcus got into his car and sat. For a moment before starting the engine, he thought about Linda Carter and wondered what she was feeling right now. He did not feel satisfaction at her dismissal. He felt sad that it had come to this, sad that someone could work in banking for 15 years and still not understand how to treat people fairly. He hoped she would learn from this experience, though he knew that real change was difficult and rare. He hoped that the bank would follow through on its promises to improve training and policies. And he hoped that maybe, just maybe, the next person who walked into that bank would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserved regardless of what they looked like.